Lois Rudnick and Jonathan Richards' play Ever the Twain delves into Mark Twain's and William Shakespeare's impact on literature. Which writer is more important?
Lois, you've really delved into Mark Twain's work, and Jonathan, you've spent time looking into William Shakespeare. Both have left an indelible mark on literature, but who is the best writer?
Shakespeare, definitely his head stands up above the crowd, not just between him and Mark Twain, but pretty much acknowledged as the great writer and poet in the English language. And Twain, awfully good, but not at that level.
If we're measuring Twain by American standards, then I would say he is definitely the superior character. Because as he wrote in his autobiography, am I an American? I'm not an American. I am the American. He was the most iconic American of his century, beloved here and abroad.
Certainly
Yes.
two of the most quoted
Yes.
writers in our language.
Exactly. They are without a doubt the most. And each of them was the most important iconic figure of his respective country. That is certainly true.
And Twain was a great admirer of Shakespeare.
Admirer.
Admirer maybe doesn't even approach the level, as Lois pointed out. He really began a rivalry with Shakespeare that he was punching up in his weight class, so to speak. He aspired to be the American Shakespeare, although in a very different field. He did not write, or he wrote some plays that did not do well at all.
They were disasters, Jonathan.
But Shakespeare never wrote a novel, so, you know.
Both of the writers had work that was banned at different times throughout history. What does that say about either of their work?
Well, it says, I would say for Twain, it says something about the nerves he touched. So in his own time, Huckleberry Finn was banned by many libraries and not taught in schools. The Concord Public Library said that that Huck and his friends were terrible role models for ingenuous youth, and they did not speak proper English. He was a radical figure. Never before in American literature had a down and out, physically abused child of an alcoholic father been the spokesperson in a novel. And so Mark Twain wrote back to the Concord Public Library, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for every book of mine that's been excommunicated. You have doubled my sales.
However, in Shakespeare's time, writing the wrong kind of thing probably had more potentially serious consequences, like having your head chopped off. So, for instance, there's some suspicion, not by any means proven, that Shakespeare was a secret Catholic. Being a Catholic ran counter to Elizabethan and to Tudor England.
Exactly.
Did he know anything about America at the time, and he lived in England?
We believe he did. There was certainly, America was being explored and written about, and trophies being brought back to England at that time. There was a historian named Thomas Harriot who wrote about the New World, and that certainly could have come across Shakespeare's desk, and The Tempest, as Lois has pointed out.
I used to teach The Tempest as the first work of American literature in English, because Caliban is the first indigenous character in English to speak about the rape and exploitation of the New World. And that's not the way The Tempest was taught to me when I was an undergraduate.
No.
It's the way it's taught now.
That's
when
interesting.
he says, this island was mine by Sycorax, my mother, until you took it all away from me. I was mine own king.
So that brings up an interesting point. I mean, we keep reading these people, we keep performing these plays. Are people finding new things that are relevant to each age?
Yes.
Why do they keep coming up?
I think because the profundity of their writing, at the deepest level, when Mark Twain took on issues of race, he often was not able to carry through in a way that you would like to see, because he's always writing comedy, and comedy has a hard time sometimes dealing with really profoundly difficult problems. But the best book he ever wrote on race as a construction of society, not as a biological factor, is one that's being given much more attention now than Huck Finn as it should be. I teach it, The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, about a black woman who is 1/16 black, because she has a drop of black blood in her, even though she looks white. And the story, the plot, the crazy plot revolves around these issues of who is white and who is black and how do you know. And it falls apart at the end, but up until that time, It's really dealing with Plessy versus Ferguson. It was written during the time that this decision was made. So it's an amazing text by a white man, certainly not comparable to the works by Ida B. Wells or Frederick Douglass or others of that time, Du Bois, teaching that we socially construct race, white people socially construct blackness as an evil in order to justify their wrongs toward African Americans.
And Jonathan, I mean, Shakespeare has done all the time. I mean, like Baz Luhrmann put it in, you know, Romeo and Juliet with like this incredibly disco sorts of scenes, and we see it constantly. It's being updated. I mean, people are finding things all the time.
Yes, I think maybe to excess. But one thing that, along the same lines of social progressiveness that Lois was talking about, Shakespeare also had a larger mind and a larger view of social wrongs than was typical of his time, and
Yeah.
you see that in The Merchant of Venice. It's difficult to do The Merchant of Venice because the Jew Shylock has. He ultimately wants his pound of flesh, and he has, but he also gets prick us, do we not bleed? He gets sympathetic human dimensions that you would not find probably in Marlowe, for instance. And similarly, as Lois just mentioned, with Caliban, the Indian, the native in The Tempest, there's he's presented to some extent negatively, and that probably may but well have been the way Shakespeare thought, and certainly the way his time thought, but he also expresses so eloquently the way his world has been taken away from him by these European exploiters.
And, you know, Huck Finn has been banned in recent times, starting in the NAACP came out against it in 1957 after Brown versus the Board of Education. There's an African-American writer who has rewritten the entire book without the N-word, which is one of the criticisms. But another criticism is that Jim is this childlike, you know, slave-like figure. He is a slave who just does whatever Tom and Huck tell him to do. And yet there's another dimension to Jim that's extraordinary. He is the only fully moral character in the novel who risks his life, who becomes a father figure to Huck, who never had one, and who stays with Tom when Tom is wounded after playing a horrible trick on him to make sure that he doesn't die.
Both of the authors drew a lot on previous literature or folk tales. So why?
As do all authors.
Yes.
Why do we read them instead of reading the original tales? What are they bringing?
Well, I think style has a lot to do with it. You learn to write by reading. Everything you do that goes into your style comes from what you've absorbed from other things. Shakespeare drew a lot on the Holinshed's Chronicles. He drew a lot. He drew to some extent, we think, on Thomas Harriot, the early chronicler of the New World. It's not the facts that you put into the play that make it great. It's the way it sings.
Right.
Is it the
Exactly.
human element that they're bringing in?
It's the depth and profundity. Before Mark Twain wrote Huck Finn, there was Sut Lovingood, who was a famous kind of folk character who was a lot Huck-like. But there's nothing in the stories about Sut that have the moral dimension, the compassion, the intelligence, the kind of innocent exploration of all of the horrors of the world Huck is living in that he doesn't understand because he was brought up to believe in slavery, even though some of the slaves lived better than he did as a white trash boy. So it really is about the quality of thinking, the quality of heart, the quality of language, the style that makes a difference. Anyone can tell a story.
There's a critic named Harold Bloom who wrote a book in which he credits Shakespeare with the invention of the human. The idea is that the human dimensions that Shakespeare gives his characters was pretty much a new concept in literature at that time, that it wasn't just stock characters or characters intended to convey a certain kind of message, but with a full range of humanity.
So
Hemingway says that about Huck Finn. He said it's the best book we have in our canon. All modern American literature started from it. And the reason he says that is that Twain had the courage to create a purely vernacular character who did not speak in the register of college-educated people. And this is something that I think both Shakespeare and Twain felt deeply and had in common. They both had a 3rd, 4th grade education. They were autodidacts.
Right.
They were self-trained. They were sometimes looked down upon. Mark Twain always felt a little bit not part of the American literati because he said, I'm a mere humorist.
And a
Because
hick
he's-
from Missouri.
A hick from Hannibal, Missouri.
And Shakespeare was a hick from Stratford.
From Stratford on
Exactly.
Avon. So who's the most important to literature?
Clearly, the most important to literature, if you had to come down with one or the other, would be Shakespeare.
I
But I think that, you know.
Okay,
if
defend
you-
your position, as they'd say in High
If you took
Fidelity.
that too seriously, nobody would ever write. So, yeah.
Exactly. I would say Mark Twain has been of extraordinary significance because he traveled all over the world. He was beloved in India, he was beloved in Germany, he was beloved for the most part until he wrote Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court in England, and they even forgave him for that. Africa, you name it. He influenced major African American writers like Ralph Emerson, who claim him, as well as even more contemporary African American writers. It's not that they don't have issues with his portrayal of African Americans, but that he allowed people to speak in the voice of the people.
One thing that we get into in the play, which is not really widely recognized, is how popular Shakespeare was in Mark Twain's America, in 19th century America. He was not elitist entertainment, he was popular entertainment. He was in every productions being done in tents and in muddy fields and miners and pioneers moving west. You could often find a volume of the complete works of Shakespeare along with the Bible tucked into knapsacks.
It sounds like you'll have to come to a stalemate on who's more important.
Yes, I think in the play, our Mistress of Ceremonies says it's a draw.
All right.
And really,
And I would agree, sir, would you not?
I would agree, and I would say better is irrelevant when you.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much for talking with us about
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
giants of literature.
Yes.